Okay, all right. Now it's going to be Leviticus. Um, what I did, I read it all, and I made little notes of what's in here. So, um, it's there's a lot of stuff that it's basically just an instruction book for the priests, um, how they how they're supposed to do the sacrifices, all kinds of sacrifices, how they're supposed to handle things, different details like that, the priestly procedures. So, of course, I'm not going to read through all of that word for word, but so chapter 1 deals with the sin and the peace offerings, sacrifices, offerings in general, and atonement, how that's working that way. And chapter 2 is grain offerings. They're not supposed to have leaven, and they're not supposed to have honey. And salt was supposed to be present all the time, in that it was mandatory. So I found that interesting. Salt is mentioned in the New Testament. It could be symbolic, the salt of the earth. It's all symbolic of Jesus, of course, but I'm just going down the list here. Chapter 3, all of these had to be a sacrifice without blemish. So again, no spot, no flaw, no blemish at all. So of course that's a type of Jesus. In chapter 3, let me get that. Aside from that, it mentions in verse 17. Yeah, let me fix this. Okay. 17. This shall be a perpetual statute throughout your generations in all your dwellings. You shall eat neither fat nor blood. This blood thing comes up a lot. Okay, so I'll mention that as we go along. In chapter 4, it also says that the sacrifice was supposed to be, at least in some cases, not all the time, or certain parts of them, were offered outside the camp. And that's a type as well. And on wood, I noticed, at least in one place, that's referred to. 5 and 6 are about the same thing. In chapter 7, it mentions in 15, the sacrifice, or no parts of it, should be left until morning. So nothing was to be left till morning, and that's another type of Christ. Okay. In 23, let me go there. Chapter 7, verse 23. Here again. And the fat of an animal that dies naturally, and the fat of what is torn by wild beasts may be used in any other way, but you shall by no means eat it. They weren't supposed to eat anything anyway torn by a beast or that died naturally, because it could have been sick. It wouldn't be healthy. So there's that, and then 26 to 27. Moreover, you shall not eat any blood in any of your dwellings, whether of bird or beast. Whoever eats any blood, that person shall be cut off from his people. Okay, so we see that again. And, this is one of the things where people, it's weird how they'll do this. Like, that's when they'll start saying, oh, but we're not under the law. Well, in that case, actually, they'd be wrong because this is in the New Testament. It's Acts chapter 15, where it specifically says that Christians, okay, the church, are not supposed to consume any blood. Okay, so that is actually practically one of the only things that's there. So that, yeah, we are supposed to follow that. Okay, no blood is to be consumed. And yeah, so that's the deal. But when it comes, I'm going over this a lot, but then you get people that, all the stuff that's, okay, that's been fulfilled. It's ceremonial law. We don't have to worry about it. Oh, they want to go back under all that, or the moral stuff that we should be, and I'll get to that. Then they want to not care. It's weird how they'll do that. I don't know. It's just weird. Okay, chapter 8. So I wanted to point that out. There are no rare steaks or medium rare. I don't care how fancy the name is for these things, but we're not supposed to eat any blood of any animal. Obviously not a human, but nothing. Not a bird, not a cow, not anything. Okay. So, nothing. All right. Chapter 8 is about the priests, priesthood, the high priest, and consecrating them. 9 is just how they do their priestly ministries. So here they're consecrated, they do the ministry. Let's see. In 10, what happens is they started the ministry, the priestly ministry. And then in chapter 10, okay, so they were told already, you have to follow the rules to the T. Okay, strictly, you had to follow the rules. And there were 2 guys who took it upon themselves to just do something else. And there was a judgment for that. And this is just an example. Like, you can't just do whatever, which is the thing when people, really think about this. But Jesus had to do everything perfectly in his whole life to be able to be the perfect sacrifice for our sins. So this is a big deal. It's not a small matter. And of course, he did fulfill all of that. Whatever the requirements were done. So, that's something to be honored very seriously. So, anyway, so he followed the rules, okay, and it's important. That's why I'm mentioning that. I'm not going to read everything, what they did, but anyway, that's what goes on here. And you get groups too that they try to take something out of that that's not in there either. So, yeah. Anyway, they take something and they'll just twist it into this whole doctrine or idea or movement, and it's not that. It's just, like how many times when I read, and I didn't read every time, but many times it talked about latter rain in the prophets. Okay, and none of it was about a latter rain revival movement. Not one of them. But they'll take a thing and they'll twist it, and they've got a name for everything that way, and it's not legitimately supported at all by the Bible. Anyway, so now chapter 11 deals with foods permitted and forbidden. This was about kosher and unkosher meats, and a lot of things had to do with the spreading, like bacteria and germs, and that's why they were supposed to do things a certain way. Here, unclean animals. There was a reason for this. Like, I mentioned this before, but the kosher animals were the animals that they were not carnivores. They were not predatory. They were actually vegetarians. The cow what else did they eat? The sheep. All these animals were not carnivores. So there must have been something about that. The carnivore animals were unkosher, unclean. They weren't supposed to eat them. And birds, the birds that were scavengers were the unclean birds, like vultures that would eat the meat of a beast that was dead for a long time. Okay, these are the cleanup crews. Okay, you don't want to be eating that meat. With seafood, it's the same thing. The fish that was kosher had the scales and the fins, like salmon or that kind of fish that had that, but they were a clean fish, and like all the shellfish was unclean. Like if you take crabs, lobsters, oysters, shrimp, any kind of shellfish, they were all unclean. And for example, like, they're shallow water fish. They're the cleanup crew. Okay, so in the shallow water, like the ocean or what, you have bacteria that's there. The dead particles from the sea life will wash up on the shore, and the shallow water is where all the scummy parts will collect. So these fish are the cleanup crew for the ocean. The shrimp are the vacuum cleaners of the seafloor, and they scoop up all that nasty bacteria and dead parts like that, and they ingest that. That's their food. So these fish are not going to be my food, I'll tell you that. I mean, people fall all over this kind of fish and they pay a lot for it. They dip it in all these sauces. I don't even want to watch it. I'm just like, no, you go right ahead, not me. Anyway, and it's not a salvation issue, obviously, but it's just a health issue. Like, yeah, not a good idea. Not a lot of people know this stuff, but there is science backing everything in here, and there are a lot of people that get their heads puffed up and they don't want to acknowledge that. You know what I mean? But that's another thing. So they think they know it all better, and one day they find out it's the opposite. So, anyway, chapter 12 deals a lot with childbirth and what they had to do, like a cleansing ritual. And it does seem like this is just so there are no infections and things. And, okay, bacteria, germs, that kind of thing. Then 13 is about leprosy, rules for if they had lepers. And apparently that's gone today. I've heard a few weird things once in a while, but technically it's gone. So that's that. So see, I mean, this is what it's mostly about. Like if you want to eat clean meats, just read chapter 11, okay? Like you don't have to, I mean, we want to read it all at least once, but I mean, you don't have to worry about all this. That's why I'm not going to read line for line here. They had, when the lepers were healed, they had a cleansing ritual. That's 14. Okay. 15 is, again, more stuff about infection and what to do, bacteria. Day of Atonement in 16. This talks about that holiday. And of course, all the feasts are fulfilled in Jesus as well. But, and I mentioned that many times, but the Day of Atonement is where they had the scapegoat. And there was a scapegoat at the crucifixion. There was one person who took off, running off. I forgot which gospel it is, but that's a type. I mean, this is a type of that. So, that was fulfilled. Anyway, so there's that. 17. This is all about blood. So let me see, 10 through 14 in particular, but here it talks about the sanctity of blood. Okay, so details about that, of people murdered, because there's shedding of blood. 10, okay, I want to read from 10 on. And whatever man of the house of Israel, or of the strangers who dwell among you, who eats any blood, I will set my face against that person who eats blood, and will cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, no one among you shall eat blood, nor shall any stranger who dwells among you eat blood. Okay, so the point here too is it's only through blood that there's atonement for sin. That's the only way, no other way. So one and only way is through Jesus. So of course it's, his atonement that is valid. I mean, we don't do it this way anymore because it's fulfilled through him. Back then, this was a type and they did it that way, but it's through him. But that's the point here. It's it's critical that way, like the life is in the blood. So you're not supposed to eat blood, okay? And the atonement gets applied when you come to Jesus and get saved. So that's it. But I just wanted to emphasize this again, all that about that. And it's interesting, the people who are in any of these dark groups, like of the occult, they make sacrifices and they consume the blood specifically to rebel against God's word, okay? And demons are, they'll congregate around that kind of thing. So, and they have their, there's a whole operation going on there. So I've talked about that before, but you just want to stay away from that. Okay. Now in 18, it mentions more laws about morality, sexual sin. Okay, so again, it's a lot of reading here, so I'm just going to mention these were not allowed, okay? There was no incest at all of any kind. So no family member at all. And this is where it becomes more clear, like there are more explicit rules put down about that kind of thing. Incest and all the relations family-wise that were totally forbidden, I mean, yeah, so no family members, okay, that's incest. And I mean, that, and then adultery, of course, no adultery, that's mentioned again. It mentions no offering your children to Molech, or Moloch, how it's sometimes said, which is human sacrifice of children. And of course, you're not supposed to have relations with a child. I mean, that's so evil. I mean, it doesn't even, get into every detail here, but there's so many things that, are evil and not supposed to be done. It mentions, not the same gender, all that stuff. So all that, not bestiality, which is the sex with animals. Of course, that's disgusting, so not that either. And so So that's about it here for this. I mean, it's just that kind of thing, sexual sin, different things. So you should read that through and pay attention, okay? In chapter 19, okay, I have this part highlighted 9 through 10. It's just general morality. But here, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. And you shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather every grape of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. So this was another measure that was to be taken in care for the poor. So, like if they had a farm, which most of them did, they weren't supposed to exhaust every piece of fruit out of it all. They were supposed to leave sort of, I would say, an offering for the poor, or at least they could come by and pick that and eat it. So that was the rule, and that was good. Okay, in verse 19, here, here we go. You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your livestock breed with another kind. I mean, if that would even work, but that was not supposed to be done. You shall not sow your field with mixed seed. And some people, they don't understand some of this, but it's like if you put too many different kinds of seeds too close together, it doesn't go well. Like they struggle, they compete, and one is successful and the others are not. So there was something bad about it, but anyway, you're not supposed to do that. You have to space them out enough. So anyway, that was the deal. Nor shall a garment of mixed linen and wool come upon you. So this was about mixing materials and wearing them, and a lot of people don't understand this one. And then they want to throw everything out the window. Well, there was a reason for everything, okay, all of it, including this right here. What happened, and I looked into this, what happened is that was the stuff that they would get like a rash or it would get itchy because something about it didn't mix well. And I mean, there may be some things that mix just fine, like when you read a label on the back and it says, 50% polyester, right? Or if you're from the 70s, it might say 100%. Anyway, cotton, whatever. Some of it might be fine, but some people have allergies. But, there's certain things that didn't go well together. So it's just like in general, they didn't need to do it. So why do it? Why risk all that? So anyway, that's what that's about. So if people just dig a little, right, you find out all the scientific reasons behind a thing. Okay, now 26. Here, this is another one. You shall not eat anything with the blood, nor shall you practice divination or soothsaying. Okay, so this was all about occultic practices, witchcraft, any of that. They were forbidden to do any of that stuff, okay? Witchcraft, sorcery, which is kind of the same, divination, astrology, going to a medium to seek, to communicate with the dead, any of this was all forbidden, okay? Okay, verse 28, that's interesting. Let me mention that. it was just right there. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead. This was a practice that the false religions used to do. They would cut themselves for the dead, like in mourning or something. So, like, don't do that. Okay, nor tattoo any marks on you. I am the Lord. So, this was another thing. Like, oh yeah, no prostitution. That's, the sexual sin thing here. Anyway, but so, I know like people will say that then, but technically, I mean, they weren't supposed to get any markings on their body. Like today, we see so many tattoos. And what's ultimately going to happen is the mark of the beast, okay? So that's going to be a combination of things, but, just a good rule is nothing. Some things, absolutely not, but some things it's just better not to. And, I never understood, like, why would people want to do this to themselves? Like, I don't know. Anyway, I mean, I never had any interest in that. I mean, the younger you become a Christian, your body's the temple of the Holy Spirit, and you want that to be pure. You want only what God gave you. You don't want a bunch of other stuff on there, Okay, 29, yeah, I did mention no prostitution. Today, we could also say no pornography. They didn't have that back then. There are things that are obvious extensions, that they didn't really have that item, so they would have been in there otherwise, 31 has more occult stuff, so I'm going to read that. Give no regard to mediums and familiar spirits. Do not seek after them to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. So what's a familiar spirit? Well, this was like these mediums would be possessed with a demon. That's how they were able to do their thing, because they wouldn't have the information any other way. The demon would. So it would all go through that they could tell the person something about somebody that lived back whenever, and a relative or whatever. And they could even pretend to be them, and, like the seance thing. So that's how it worked. And of course, they were supposed to avoid all that, obviously. So anyway, now 32 is interesting here, okay? This is where you get the laws of chivalry. You get honor for different groups of people. And boy, is that lacking in society today. And, these people think they're all enlightened and everything, but it was Christianity that brought this stuff to society and made it better in every way. That's why you had chivalry from, towards women from men. I mean, you don't see that today. I mean, you have practically the opposite. I know I've seen it, for sure, a lot of times. Anybody that's in a weakened position, or like a pregnant woman, people need to honor that. And they don't. Here, it says, you shall rise before the gray-headed and honor the presence of an old man and fear your God. I am the Lord. Now, for instance, when a good example is when people take the bus. I've seen this so many times. There were times in my life, on and off, that I would have to take a bus, okay? And you would used to see it, that if an elderly person came in, or a pregnant lady or something, that the other able-bodied people in the prime of their life, middle of life adults, like 20 to 40, men and women, whatever, they would, if the bus was full, one of them would give up their seat, and it should be a man if there's, in that case, but they should give up their seat for somebody in a less fortunate situation than themselves. I mean, it could be an elderly person, it could be a pregnant lady, whatever, but, and of course, handicapped people, but now they have designated spots for them. But that's what people used to do. They used to have some honor and dignity and integrity enough that they would do that kind of thing, hold the door for somebody like this. Or men used to hold the door for ladies, all that stuff. Now, you don't even see this anymore. You'd be in a bus, nobody even gets up for them. They're like, oh, well, you got in later, too late, too bad for you. That's the attitude now. And it's really sickening. But, that's the thing, is that's where it all came from. And since these things are fleeing society, all the good stuff goes with it. So, yeah, you don't see them doing that now. You really don't. And it's really sad. I mean, anyway, let's see. There was something in here about the disabled. So I read it in here somewhere, but like, they were supposed to be good to them, of course, and not do something pranky, So, like, it talked about that because some people, I guess, did that. Laws about strangers. Over here, 35. Wait. This was economics. You shall do no injustice in judgment, in measurement of length, weight, or volume. You shall have honest scales, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So there was absolutely no unjust gain to be going on, no dishonesty or cheating in any way like that. Nothing. Okay? No taking advantage of people at all. So that's the deal there. Okay, 24 has something I wanted to go over. Yeah, here. But I have said to you, you shall inherit their land, and I will give it to you to possess a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God who has separated you from the peoples. And this, in our case, applies in that way as well. As Christians, we are separated from the world. We are separated from the worldly people, the peoples of the world, in that sense. And if you're really walking right, it will show. It will show, that you're separated. So that's just how it's supposed to be. Okay, 26. And you shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy and have separated you from the peoples that you should be mine. Okay, and I think of that Bible verse about, you can't be a friend of God and the world at the same time. You'll be an enemy of one and a friend of the other. One or the other. You can't have both. So that's the idea. Okay, and then here, 27, a man or a woman who is a medium or who has familiar spirits shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, their blood shall be upon them. So the same thing with that again, okay? That was forbidden. Okay, 21 and 22 is, again, more rules. Here for priests, it goes on with that. Offerings, okay. again, the animal without defect is mentioned again in 22. 23, it has the holidays. It goes through all the holidays. And of course, like I said, it's all been fulfilled through Christ. It's all symbolic of Him, it's a type of Him. We don't do these things this way today. And so, and it each time it gives more details, like it kind of evolves in a way with the feasts as you read through these books here. So, and again, they're all types of Christ. He fulfills all of this. So that's that. Now 24. This is all care for the articles of the tabernacle, more ministry stuff. 25, it had all kinds of different Sabbaths. Like I mentioned this earlier, the Sabbath of the land, the year of Jubilee, like they would cancel debts, and how they would provide for that year that they wouldn't gather. Okay, in 35, let me go to that. Okay, here. Another one of these. If one of your brethren becomes poor and falls into poverty among you, then you shall help him like a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with you. Take no usury or interest from him, but fear your God, that your brother may live with you. You shall not lend him your money for usury, nor lend him your food at a profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. So, they were supposed to help one another if somebody fell into a bad situation and got poor or homeless. They were supposed to take them in. And that's what we need to see in the church today. I'm not saying anyone, you have to be careful, obviously, but, like they don't want to help anyone is the problem. So yeah, so there's that. And, there are all kinds of, like I said, cultural things going on. Anyway, we have this. Then we have blessings and judgments. So if they did the right thing, they got a blessing. If they didn't, they got a judgment. And this is just, if you do this or that, then this will happen. And, that's that there. 27 is all about items that were dedicated, property dedicated to God. So that's 27. And it just talks about that, all this, which again, this was laws for their land back then, okay? It's not for us today. All right, now there are a couple of other things here in chapter, and I have this as a separate list. Leviticus chapter 23, 9 through 12 mentions the Feast of First Fruits. And of course, that's a type of the resurrection, and that's mentioned in the New Testament. So anyway, in 13, it talks about the grain offering, and the showbread, which is a type of Jesus as the bread of life. And of course, so is the manna in the same way, but it didn't mention that there. In 37, it talks about the drink offering, which is also a type because, he said, if anyone thirsts. So we have the living water, all that. It's a type of that. In chapter 24, 1 through 4, we have about the lampstand. And of course, one of the I am statements is he's the light of the world. And in 5 through 9, the same thing with the bread. of life, you know, one of those I am statements, he said. So that's a type of that. So, anyway, these are more fulfilled types and prophecies here that we see. I mean, the whole book of Leviticus really is. So, okay, that's that. And I'm actually done early in a way. So, what I'll do is I'll make another video now, and I'm going to start with numbers, and it'll probably be a shorter one. But I have a neat thing to show here, so I'm gonna, yeah, okay, I'll just do that. Okay, so let me get that. I'll make another video. I'll be right back.